name's Tegan Levine.
My name is Melanie Nevis.
And today we're going to be talking about something that you've probably been wondering, hey, why haven't these two girls talked about it sooner? Because it seems like something they would want to talk about. And it's true, we did. We're going to be talking about Avalon. Beautiful Avalon and Morgan Le Fay.
Mm-hmm.
Another very elusive topic in the Arthurian legends, I feel like. Because Morgan's only, well, there's so many things to say, but essentially they're just not very fleshed out in all of the earlier versions, right?
Yeah. Partially that they're not fleshed out, partially that they're just very different from what we've ended up with.
Yeah. How do you mean exactly? Elaborate.
Morgan Le Fay as a character, we know her as this evil sorceress more so now. But originally, she was a lot nicer. She was like a very benevolent figure at first, and that has changed. So I think that's basically what I mean by that.
So when you're saying that she started out as, because I always kind of thought it was the other way around. I kind of thought she starts out, I guess it depends on where you start, right? Like,
It depends on where you start. I think before we even get to Morgan Le Fay, though, we should kind of just overview Avalon because that's where she's from. And I think it's where a lot of Arthurian legends, it's a really important part in Arthurian legends because it's where Arthur is taken after the Battle of Camlan and either where he died or recovered, depending on the legend. But it's also her home. And so there's like a lot of mystery surrounding Avalon. So what is my question's like, what the hell is Avalon?
Yes, so Avalon, what is it? Where is it? It's I feel like even with the most information we have, it's still quite vague, I want to say, because from what I understand, there's one place where they're pretty sure it is, but then there's another place that could also be it. But what I remember reading is that it is there's a connection between the word Avalon and it having like a lot of apples. There's like big apple orchards everywhere, and that there's also a connection to healing people, and essentially it's like this mystic island where these women lived. Like, I feel like I can't help but think that whole mysticism's kind of like done on deliberately. Like, it's very shrouded in, we don't know.
It is shrouded in mystery. So yeah, I read the thing about the apples as well. It is a place that's said to be the final resting place of Arthur and the place where Excalibur was forged. It's the home of Morgan Le Fay, who is this benevolent sorceress and healer, especially when the myths kind of come to be and when they're first written down. And the exact location is unclear. It's up for debate, but it is described as this magical realm that's really difficult to access. And so I think that the fact that it's clouded and shrouded in mystery, like you said, it is done on purpose because we don't understand it. We don't understand where it is, where it's from, like what else exists there. So like some sources say that it's off the coast of Wales, others say that it's in the English Channel, others say that it's in Somerset, others say it's in a parallel dimension. Like,
yeah, I was just gonna say that a lot of people think that it could just be like an alternative universe or an alternative dimension where, I mean, like, technically, if you want to take the approach of like fairy lore, fairies like live in a parallel universe to ours, kind of. So it could very much be a part of that, especially because Morgan Le Fay is supposed to be connected to the fairy realm. So that would kind of make sense too, especially with all of the super magical swords and armor they make and produce.
Yeah. Yeah, so, like there's all these magical swords, so it makes sense that they would come from a magical place. So yeah, this concept of the other world or another realm.
Yeah.
makes sense. And um, it's a place of healing and rejuvenation, and it's this like paradise-like land of eternal youth and beauty that also has a lot of apple trees.
Because you know what they say about apples, an apple a day keep you young
Keeps the
forever.
doctor away.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
I was like, where you go? Keeps you young forever. Okay.
but yeah, right? No, but it's interesting
Yeah.
because I think a lot of people have settled on Glastonbury as being
Yes.
Avalon, right? Because at the time, whatever time
Mm-hmm.
that was, Glastonbury is kind of like up on a hill, and there's a whole bunch of like old marshland that could have surrounded it, making it seem like it was like in water. And you would have only been able to get there by like crossing like a bridge or something like through the water to get there, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah, it's not an island today. On top of this hill, which is called the Tor, is this
Hmm.
little castle-like thing. Um, and it used to be surrounded by lowlands. The lowlands used to be, or it is surrounded by lowlands, but the lowlands used to be marshes, which were
Yes.
only accessible by a wooden boardwalk.
Yes.
And it's actually like the world's oldest timber trackway there was dated back to 3800 BCE.
Whoa. Okay. Well, there we go.
And then people started draining the lowlands since about the 11th century. So
Oh,
at the time
interesting.
that this would have happened, and like, at the time that these things would have been written, because Joffrey of Monmouth's Historica, where Avalon is first described, that's written in 1136, so 12th century. So just the century before is when the lowlands would have actually started to be drained of water. So
Oh,
it's in
interesting.
recent history that all of this area would have been wet, I guess.
Okay. So interesting.
Yeah.
And then I
Yeah.
also read, like you said, that that people also might think, and I quite like this idea a little bit more, to be honest, that it's the Isle of Man,
Mhm.
which I think is quite interesting. And then
Yeah.
again, kind of like what I was saying not well in the last episode about Nova Scotia, it's kind of like it's very like Isle of Man even more so is quite isolated,
Mhm.
and it kind of gives like even in our very modern, not it's not like everybody just goes to the Isle of Man on a holiday, right? Like only people that really search it out end up there. And there's
Yeah.
apparently tons of apple orchards there too, so that's the other reason why
Yeah.
it could be
Y-
potentially associated.
In
But I think it,
Irish
yeah.
mythology,
Yes, yes.
it's got like a rough association with Amen Ablach,
Mhm.
which um, is an island paradise where apple trees fruit and flower at the same time. So that's supposed to be the Isle of Man. And
Oh,
it was
cool.
known as the home of Manannán MacLeod, who was an Irish sea god
You said
and
that's
is like
super
known.
good, I feel like. I think. I mean, I don't really know, but it sounded good.
Cool.
Yay, you're
I
so good with
did I
accents.
did listen to it to see if I could like get the pronunciation okay
You're really good. You're
beforehand.
really good. Props.
Not always, not always, no. But and it's supposed to be like a place of healing and where there's no winter, and it has forests
Mhm.
of apple trees. So with those similarities, it kind of became as a possibility for Avalon
And
for
I
sure.
think this whole thing around this god at some point, I don't want to say it got debunked, but they were like maybe it wasn't named after that god. So if you took that away, what else would it why what else would draw the conclusion? I don't know. To me, I immediately felt like that was Avalon. Like if I had to pick between the two, like I would pick the Isle of Man. I think it makes a lot of sense. But anyways, I digress. Maybe they just don't want people to know that's where it is, and if that's the case, go to Glastonbury. You know,
I mean,
I'm
yeah,
gonna go
there's a
there.
lot of stuff about Glastonbury and Arthur, which we kind of talked about in the very first episode, talking about
Yeah.
Arthur and the Arthurian legends, and the monastery there when it was operational. It was like the
Mhm.
biggest one, but then it burned down, and then they just found the bones and started this myth of Avalon, or not myth of Avalon, but like these myths of Arthur and Guinevere being buried there only 10 years after it burned down. And that's just, it seems too coincidental
Yes, I
to me.
agree. I agree.
I mean, I love the story because, they also say that the tour crosses the bunch of ley lines cross there, and that it
Mm.
is an entrance to a Celtic fairy realm or something like that
Ooh.
is at the top of the tour or at the base of the mountain, one of the two.
Now, please be advised if you're planning to visit this because you're interested in ley lines and you want to find a fairy realm, be careful because a lot of the times it happens that people find the fairy realm, they just don't come back to talk about it. Okay. So, like, proceed with caution. I
Yeah,
feel like
Claire was really lucky
yeah, that time
in
traveling
Outlander.
thing is like a whole other yeah, we're talking about an Outlander in case you don't know. But
I know,
that's
but
a
they thought that she was taken by the fairies.
yeah, that's a whole other business. That's like a whole other thing. I would love to just like explore that a little bit. But I mean, from what I like, I think before I was into any like, okay, let's just put it this way. Fairies were like my gateway into into paganism. And they
Yeah.
were like the first thing that I got like interested in growing up. And almost every story, every account, like everything single thing that I have come into experience in relation to fairies. And please also side note that I work with a fairy oracle very often on my healing page, Ravi Ve Holistic on Instagram. Shameless plug. They said it was okay. Um, the fairies are always they're kind of dicey, right? Like you should always proceed with like a little bit of lightheartedness, but also a little bit of caution because they don't take things the same way that we do. And also there's lots of stories of people just getting lost in fairy realms. So if you're trying to search those out, just like I'm so dead serious, like be careful. Like be careful.
Fair.
Don't get yeah,
Fair.
because you might not come back. That's the thing.
Which, okay, so like to bring this back,
To
like this
Avalon.
concept of the yeah, this concept of the Celtic otherworld is
Mm-hmm.
the theory that Avalon isn't of this world at all, because there isn't really any early written evidence to connect Avalon directly to the real location. And because of this, this leaves room for a lot of creative ideas. So ancient Celts believed that apples had magical healing properties. Irish and British believed that islands could be portals to other worlds where souls
Mm,
and dead dwelled in eternal youth and eternal bliss.
yeah.
And so those two things together means that Avalon may have been about pre-Christian British and Irish views of the afterlife and may have been associated with death. Um, and that's
That
a
makes
very
sense.
different, and that's why it's kind of mystical and unknown, and why a lot of Christian authors maybe didn't touch it.
Yes, because it freaked them out. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. Oh,
Apparently, actually, locals and visitors to Tor claim to see unusual lights in the sky and around the base of the tower. So that's why a lot of people also think that there's this portal at Tor in Glastonbury.
oh, that's so cool. I actually know people that teach this, teach about this in like metaphysical classes and stuff. So I know that it's very, very, it's still a hot topic
Yeah.
to this day. Um, And hey, I'm definitely going to check it out the next time I'm in the UK. Let's be honest.
I mean, there's also apparently another island in the north of France, actually, Ile Laval.
Okay, don't know where that is. Gonna Google it.
It's apparently the northwest coast of France, and there's a theory that that is where Avalon is,
Could
because
also
they've
make
like
sense.
unearthed a lot of skeletons and people and horses from the foot of a standing stone, apparently. So like that's one theory.
You can,
But then
yeah, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
there's also a poet named Robert Graves who, in his novel Golden Fleece, suggested that Mallorca in Spain is
Okay.
actually Avalon.
I think,
So
hmm,
I don't know.
like it could be.
Avalon being Glastonbury Tor is the most prominent theory.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess this is the whole thing. Like any island kind of like floating off in the mists of the water could feel mystical and feel like another realm and another world at any point. And all of them are beautiful and all of them like
Yeah.
islands just have a thing, right? Like even in modern times, islands just have this thing that make you feel like rejuvenated and something about being surrounded by water. So like there's a lot of kind of symbolism and energy that just kind of like
Mhm.
flows naturally with that idea. So I could see how the two could like overlap no matter where it might be. You know what I mean?
Well, it's funny that you say that because
Yeah.
again, in Glastonbury Tour, there's the low-lying ground produces an optical illusion that's called Fata Morgana,
Okay.
where Tor looks like it's rising up and out of the mist.
Oh
And
boy.
it's because light rays are bent when they pass through layers of like temperatures of air that are different, right?
Hmm. Okay.
But it
Whoa.
creates this like cool phenomenon. And then that term, Fata Morgana, comes from Italy, but it
Hmm.
also originates from Morgan Le Fay,
Hmm.
and it means fair Morgan in
Yeah.
Italian.
Okay.
And that is also a testament to the fact that these stories about Morgan Le Fay and like this term for miss were carried by Norman settlers all the way to like Italy,
Oh wow. Okay.
which is kind of cool
That's very
because they
interesting.
use an Italian term to describe this optical illusion that happens in the UK.
Yeah, well, we've seen it once, we've seen it twice, we've seen it many times. The way words spread, things travel.
Yeah, yeah.
So
It means fair Morgan, which is cool.
Avalon, very, kind of sounds like a beautiful place. I think that as a girl growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, interested in witchcraft and all of those things, learning more about like Avalon feels like this call, right? Like it feels, I don't know. Tell me if I'm
You read
wrong.
The Mists of Avalon, didn't you?
I have not read The Mists of Avalon.
No.
Not
Oh.
only have I not read The Mists of Avalon, but I just found out it was a book series like this week or last week, I guess technically. I
Is it
didn't even
really?
I didn't even know. I had no idea. I
I
knew
didn't
that
know that either.
oh,
I tried.
you didn't know it was a series?
No, I tried to read it and I just couldn't get into it.
No, so I actually saw the mini series like a million years ago when I was a kid, and I think I want to say it was the late 90s or maybe early 2000s. Like there was a whole mini
Hmm.
series around Merlin, and Martin Short played Merlin, and then there was a whole series.
Really?
Oh yeah, and there was a whole mini
That's
series.
such terrible casting.
I always thought he was really good actually. He's a
Really?
shapeshifter in it. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Oh, okay. Eh.
listen, I just rewatched the previews. I was trying to find them to stream. I can't find them anywhere. I rewatched the previews, and by today's standards, it looks hokey as fuck. But I swear to you, first of all, these were movies that were released. These were miniseries that released straight to DVD. Like, you know what I mean? So, but there's also the Mists of Avalon with Angelica Houston and Juliana Margulies and the mom from Game of Thrones, she's in it too. I don't
Oh,
care. I'm
really?
gonna find it. I'm gonna rewatch it, whether or not it's good. I didn't even know there were books. I didn't know that series was an adaptation of the books of the Miss of Avalon. But I did do an overview for this podcast of the book series
Hmm.
because there's just not a lot of material about Morgan Le Fay or Avalon.
Yeah.
Historically, like kind of what we've said already is it, and that's it. So it's real. I thought it was really interesting because once we hit the 70s, this is when we start to see more character development around Merlin, and then by the
Hmm.
80s, in 1983, I think Mists of Avalon is released, which is
Hmm.
the full-on development of basically it's the Arthurian legends told from the perspective of Morgan Le Fay, right?
Yeah.
So, and it kind of changes the whole synopsis of the stories.
Hmm.
But
And I will say, like, just really quickly. Obviously, all the controversy surrounding the author
Oh, I
at the
don't know
time that I was
anything.
reading it. Oh, yeah, at the
Nothing.
time that I was reading it, none of this had come out. So,
Can I just ask, was
yeah,
she a white supremacist? Is that what you're about to say?
no, she was
Okay.
accused of child sexual abuse by her daughter.
Whoa.
Hmm.
Whoa, didn't know any of that. Oh,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of controversy about the author, Marion Zimmer Bradley, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But like
no.
at the time, when the mini series was coming out and all the stuff, and like when I was a teenager reading it or trying to read it, because I
Fuck.
never actually got through the whole thing,
Well, I
this stuff
guess.
hadn't come out yet.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that is so fucking upsetting, honestly. I have to
Hmm.
swear. Like, it's just you. That's such.
Yeah.
I'm so
And
sad
it's
for that
unfortunate
girl.
because, well, it's unfortunate for a lot of reasons, but it
Yeah.
is one of the few books that kind of provides that feminist lens and perspective to a lot of these stories. And obviously, that is done, and it's like someone more like of the modern day and era taking those and adapting them. And we see that happening a lot
Yeah.
now.
So on one hand, I was going to say I actually think that that's a good thing, like in the sense that like I said, we live in a time now from the approximately like the late 1800s to now. We've seen a huge revival, and we've kind of covered that revival of magic in its various forms throughout history. And it is a more modern setting, a backdrop to explore, but it's possible because there is this like freedom to explore these things, to look under new perspectives. But you know what, like it's really just that information just really
It changed everything for
such
you,
a
didn't it?
such a fucking, yeah, I don't even have the
Yeah.
words. I just want to swear
Yeah.
a lot. It's so upsetting.
Yeah.
And all this to say too is many of these writers or authors or these people, like, doesn't really matter whether they're pagan or they're just like exploring, a feminist lens, or they're, Christian or whatever. A lot of them are shitty people.
Yeah. There's a lot of shitty people in the world.
And it sucks because it becomes really hard to find anything that you can like look at and explore without finding out that the author was a huge a-hole.
Yeah,
That's so
sadly.
disappointing, man. I'm so crushed.
Yeah.
Oh, oh. Well,
So let's move on and
yeah,
away
okay.
from that then. Let's
Mm,
pivot to who is Morgan Le Fay?
oh,
So, like, she's known as being this fairy type priestess, dark magician, enchantress, witch, goddess, shape changer, healer. She's like known as being a lot of things, but
mhm,
she's first introduced into Arthurian legend by Geoffrey of Monmouth in 1150. But there's a lot of theories that her character leads back to Celtic mythology and then kind of develops with tales and oral traditions as things change and like develops into this new rendition of the tale basically. And because she is so mystical and because the place that she's from and inhabits is so mystical, again you can kind of see how that link to Celtic mythology exists and how it would
mhm,
be.
mhm.
So yeah, sometimes she goes by Morgan, sometimes Morgana, sometimes Morgane, but she's a staple figure.
Yeah, I always found that confusing because in that whole story where this girl, like, I see this happening a lot in stories where they'll have like three sisters or four brothers or whatever, and two of them will have almost identical names. Like there's Morgane, and then there's Morganus or something like this. And apparently, that, like in one of the Arthurian legends, she's the one that he has Mordred with,
Hmm.
but it's like ultimately organized by Morgan Le Fay. And then there's other versions where she is her. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I
Mhm.
think that part of it is yes. There's like I almost think it's different facets of the same character sometimes.
And I think so too. Yeah. Even at one point, we read something that Morgan Le Fay and the Lady of the Lake were ultimately the same character as well, right? Which they
Yeah,
very well
yeah.
could have been, and then just broken up. Or
And then like sometimes Vivian is her sister, and so there's all of these stories, but in terms of there being a lot of names that are just slightly different, they're all very similar. I think it's either different facets of the same person or just in terms of where the stories are told, that's that version of the name in that place.
so, how does now? Just before the podcast, we were talking about that book series that you had recommended at the beginning of the podcast by Jack White.
Jack White?
What's
Yeah.
his what's his story
Oh my
on
gosh.
Morgan Le Fay? Do you know slash remember or no?
I don't remember.
Okay. I really don't want to reference Miss of Avalon now, but I'm going to just because I feel like it would be remiss not to.
He goes, I think he still refers to her as Morgan Le Fay,
Hmm.
and I'm pretty sure like she is an enchantress and like owner of some magic treehouse or something like that, but I don't remember the details of the story. It's been a while since I've read the series,
Yeah.
but I know she goes by Morgan Le Fay because I just looked that up.
So a few things to note. Morgan Le Fay obviously would mean in French it would be Morgan the fairy. Basically, the fact that she has a French name with the le in there kind of indicates, it can also indicate a place that she's like coming from, like a fairy land, or that
Hmm.
she is of fairy origin, which kind of goes back to what we talked about in relation to Avalon. In the Mists of Avalon, they portray her as essentially a girl who has been raised with the Celtic tradition. And the book kind of looks at her position as she's growing up to become like a Celtic priestess. And she's also living through an era where where Catholicism is coming in and taking over. That's this perspective of the Mists of Avalon. And it's really interesting because, again, it kind of feels like that would potentially track at the time. She's trying to
Hmm.
hold on to the Celtic customs and cultures of her ancestry, and she's also trying to work with Arthur to keep that intact. But at the same time, we have this like backdrop of everything related to the Grail going on. And, obviously they changed the story
Hmm.
quite a bit, and, people get conflated from the original stories. But essentially, that's the position of that series, is that she's actually meant to be a keeper of the traditions of the old Celtic ways. And I feel
Which
like,
is just such a modern take.
yeah,
And also like a feminist take,
it's a
but it's
modern
such a modern take
feminist
that's
take, but
so
but why?
different
But
from.
how is it different? Because if she's vague in every other story, and she's a sorceress, or she's a fairy, or she's a something, like, how actually is that different?
Okay, so um she's usually introduced as Arthur's half sister, right? Her mom is
Yes.
Green, just like his,
Yeah.
but she's part of her mom's marriage with
Well,
her first husband.
she's the daughter of the father that got killed in battle, while
Yeah,
Uther Pendragon was pretending to be her father and sleeping with her mother.
exactly. Exactly. So, and
Starts
he was the
there.
Duke of Cornwall.
Yeah.
So, in English depictions in the 14th and 15th centuries, so already later, so we're talking Mallory's Le Marteau, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, she is kind of on the fringe of society and the fringe of Arthurian court, and is
Already
constantly
very Christian,
plotting,
period,
yeah, and
right?
is plotting the downfall.
Mhm.
So in Le Marteau, she steals Excalibur, gives it to her lover Avalon, with the intention of overthrowing Arthur and ruling in his place. The scheme is kind of thwarted, and Arthur discovers the sword, but she steals its magical scabbard, which has healing properties,
Mhm.
and because of that, indirectly contributes to Arthur's fatal blow. And she
Yes,
also
because he's not
conspires.
protected anymore.
Exactly. She also conspires against Guinevere because they both want Lancelot. And in
Right.
Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, she sends the Green Knight into Arthur's court in the hope that Queen Guinevere will be frightened to death.
Okay, wait. So I'm going to repeat
So,
this back because I want to make sure I'm understanding. Prior to
mhm.
that period, we just know her as a sorceress and
Well, yeah. So, like in earlier tellings, so that's the 14th, 15th century. In
yeah.
earlier stories,
Hmm.
she's like way more benevolent. So, in the 12th century,
Okay.
she's just described as the most beautiful of 9 sisters
Hmm.
who rule Avalon. And she has healing powers and can shapeshift and fly. And when Arthur is wounded in the Battle of Camlan, he's brought to her for healing because she's trusted. So she's not plotting his downfall. She promises that she can heal him and actually tries to.
Okay. Interesting.
So
Okay.
it's like it changes all of a sudden. There's this, she's linked and is plotting his downfall and is this terrible wicked sorceress, and she has healing powers.
Okay.
Earlier she has these healing powers and is like almost linked as a supernatural female character. It's kind of like linked to Celtic mythology and
Yeah.
has
So,
these other worldly characteristics, but she's not. Yeah, I guess my point is like she's very different from the later stories in the Mists of Avalon. It's very different from the later
well, it
stories.
sounds like those later stories kind of circle back around more to the original version of her as opposed to
Hmm.
that 15th century version of her.
Yeah, you're
Because
right.
she's connected back to her Celtic heritage. Like I don't like to downplay like what happens in the real world at all, but like if we look at the character of Morgan Le Fay, she gets connected back to her Celtic heritage. She gets connected back to being benevolent. She gets
Yeah.
connected back to all of the things that she's like originally associated with
Hmm.
prior to Christian influence, I want to say, when they start just kind of demonizing like all the women in their Arthurian legends.
I think it's the shift in portrayal happens just because in the late medieval period, magic was associated with witchcraft and the devil.
Oh
And
yeah.
there was a shift in general perception of like all women are
Yeah.
bad because they're linked with witchcraft and the devil.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, what I've always found kind of interesting, is like in these later medieval stories, Morgan Le Fay is this, she's got evil ambition and sexual immorality and is
Mhm.
this really dark character. But Merlin, who is described as being the son of a demon,
Yeah.
is
For
always treated
real.
kindly,
Yeah. So,
right?
okay.
Like he's still seen as Arthur's protector.
I read something about one of the more, I can't remember which one. I can't remember if it was, no, it wasn't Cletchant. Maybe it was Mallory. I can't remember. One of, or maybe it was the other, the guy in between those two. I can't remember. But one of them tells the story that basically Merlin's mother was a Virgin Mary. She was very pious. She was a
Yeah.
good woman. She was a nun. And then she is maliciously raped by a demon from
Mhm.
hell. And
Mhm.
from that, Merlin is birthed. But just before he is like passed through the canal, basically, just before she gives birth to him, there is a guy named Blaze. So I'm assuming this is Saint Blaze comes in and he gestures the sign of the cross on her stomach just before Merlin is born. And because of this, Merlin is born a good, noble person, but because of his demon father, he still retains the magical powers.
Okay, so
Which, by the way, is basically the plot for every half demon, half human fucking story that ever existed in storytelling.
oh god.
They only get to keep the good stuff, which is nice. And I guess that's what you would hope for people that have demon parents, you know?
I
But
guess, but it's just it's okay.
It's
Okay.
that's just like one of the very Catholicized like retellings of Merlin, but
That's
I guess
super Catholicized,
but I
and I
get
guess that that's what saves Merlin while Morgana is condemned for being a woman seeking magic and political power for herself.
I get that. I get what you're saying about the Mist of Avalon being like super modern, super feminist. I think that we're a bit too hard on modern adaptations of things, though, in
No, I
general,
don't think it's
sometimes, you
bad. I
know?
don't think it's bad at all. Like, I actually like a lot of modern adaptations and interpretations that are more feminist. It's just like it's so different from the versions that actually made these stories famous.
Yeah, I know.
Not the versions that started them, but the versions that made them famous.
Yeah, it's true, but it just goes to show we've come a long way. I guess because what people can actually do in the modern age is make things more inclusive of people that don't like part of the hesitancy for me to like talk for an entire hour about Avalon and Morgan Le Fay is that like there's not a lot to work with that isn't more modern. It's doubly interesting to me because I could never understand for a long time. There's a lot of like modern day Wiccans, I want to say, that they use Morgan Le Fay as like their main goddess that they worship and they pray to. And I was always very confused by this because I was like, what's the connection? What's the relation? Me not really knowing much about her.
Yeah. Yeah,
Now
yeah,
I
yeah.
kind of totally can see the line and see the connection to the fairy world and to Avalon and to her being this like sorceress slash priestess, however you want to, whatever you want to call it. It's very
Mhm.
interesting. But ultimately, I feel like she's kind of now in our modern era, at least for certain groups of people, she's very revered as like holding on to some type of like mysticism, like
Yeah.
ancient knowledge, you know? So I can totally understand why people consider her a deity. Hell, I consider Taylor Swift a deity. So it's all on the table as far as things are concerned. That's another story for another time.
You can't just say that and then
I can
not.
say whatever I want. Yeah, no, I really do. I really think that like in 2000 years from now, people will be finding all of these random memes and shit of her on the internet and they're going to be like that must have been their goddess. You know what I mean? That's what I really think is going to happen.
That's
Especially
hilarious.
especially if we actually live through an apocalypse, then for sure that's going to happen. You know what I mean? There will be other
That's so
ones.
funny.
Madonna is going to be the new Madonna. You know what I mean? Like there
Oh
will
my
be others
god.
as well. Yeah. Can you imagine? Think about it.
No,
You're like, I don't want to
there's no
imagine a
way.
world. It makes me think, I think a lot of the times if these people, like all of the, because we tend to look at, you know, goddesses or like certain figures like Morgan Le Fay and stuff who were, you know, like were they real, were they not real, just like Jesus, we don't know who was physically alive and who wasn't, if there was somebody that kind of embodied these characteristics or if there was like a famous like king who had a daughter that was like this and somehow through time she became some type of deity or something, but we really don't know how these stories of these people that, or even if they are people that we explore, we don't really know how or where or if they were real, you know? So I just wonder in like, you know, a couple thousand years from now, what people will think of the people from now when we're going to be ancient. It's
Yeah.
weird to think that we will be ancient to some people, but I think eventually we will be. But with podcasts,
Unless we, like, kill everything first.
yeah. But then, you know, yeah. But with podcasts, I think digital stuff will figure out a way to survive somehow. Got dystopian real fast.
Real quick, real quick.
But that's the thing. I find Morgan Le Fay and Avalon General to be quite elusive. But like you said, I think this is kind of the point, and also kind of why maybe many girls, even like I said, I didn't know much about Mists of Avalon before, but I could see why women would feel the call to that because at the end of the day, Morgan Le Fay and Avalon kind of symbolize something feminine and from
Mhm.
any even of the earliest details of them, we can feel it. So when women have something that they can't explain going on inside them, and then there's a story about this mystical thing that we can't explain, there's like a natural like
There's a pull.
pull, I think. And I think
Yeah.
just not for me, but for many, many people. And I think that's how these kind of, that's how we get here where we are now, with her being like a deity to some people. These, elaborate backstories. I like these elaborate magical backstories. Maybe not the writers so much, but just I like the exploration of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, it is a really interesting take, and it's a take that I appreciate,
Yeah.
of, like, it's just protection against the encroachment of Christianity.
There's not
Um
many other takes. There's like it's otherwise she was just a vague goddess or Celtic woman who could heal Arthur, or she was like a nasty bitch who was constantly trying to dethrone him and fuck him over. Like,
I mean, that said, I do really like the BBC version of Merlin,
mm,
where, like,
haven't watched it.
Morgana begins. Huh?
I haven't seen it. I want
Oh,
to
it's
see
so
it.
good. And in it, I'm gonna just spoil it for you.
Yeah, do it.
Morgana kind of begins as a friend to Arthur and Guinevere and Merlin, but yeah, in the end, she betrays them. But the one thing that's kind of nice is that she's given plausible reasons for her change of heart in the series. So, like,
Mhm.
yeah, she has these magical powers in a Camelot that's ruled over by Uther, who is a king that condemns magic practitioners. So in this series,
Mm.
Merlin is constantly hiding his magic as well. Um, but she also discovers that she is the illegitimate daughter of Uther, but he has absolutely no intention of acknowledging her and kind of like refuses that. So you can see how she would have this change of heart and then be like, well,
Mm.
screw you. I am going to take down my half brother, because why should he get all the glory, and why do you give
Mhm.
him the right to bear your name and you just continue to refuse me?
Mhm.
And, like, I can see, like, they give her some plausible reasons to have a change of heart, but, like, she does take it a step further, and then, by the end she is solely motivated by hatred and greed, and becomes this, like, pantomime villain who's always dressed in black, and
Hmm.
really awakens her magical powers with this desire to rule over Camelot, with her a decline in her morality,
Mhm.
which is interesting. But, like, for a brief moment there, you can see the change, and she actually has reasons to start that shift.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, again, modern explorations create much more diverse characters. Like they create,
Yeah.
I think you and I both grew up in the era of one-sided villains and one-sided heroes. And
Hmm.
in our day, modern tellings, there is no hero, there is no villain, there's like an anti-hero, and there's like, I don't know, whatever the opposite is for a villain, but like the idea is that they're complex characters usually, and they
Yeah.
have good and bad elements to them, and essentially I really like that form of storytelling because it's way more human, it's way more
Yeah.
honest
It
in a lot of
humanizes them
ways,
and makes them much more relatable, and
even
there
in
will be
magic.
some characters, yeah, there are some characters that you really feel the pull toward, and you understand their perspectives and why they're behaving in a certain way, and others where you're like, I get why you're being such a shit, but it's still not okay. But it provides layers and depth.
So I feel like my conclusion from exploring Morgan Le Fay and Avalon is that we need to create some more better quality fan fiction around this character. Like,
Well, I
that's
think
my
so, because here's the
takeaway.
thing. Arthur's not a saint, but he's always kind of revered as being this hero.
Do you know
Like, he
what's
has this
sad?
reputation.
Do you know what's
What?
sad? He's not a saint, but because the worst thing that he does, actually, Arthur doesn't covet anybody's wife, does he? No, he doesn't.
No.
He's the only one who doesn't. Okay, scratch what I was going to say. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. But despite his reputation of being a noble warrior and a just king, his moral ambiguity
Hmm.
is very prevalent. Like, you don't really know where his morals are.
It's true, actually.
His
Yeah.
I mean, like, he's born in a not so great way, which we already know, right?
Hmm.
With his father going after Igraine. Um, but he has a child. Arthur has a child out of wedlock, who is the product of an incestuous union with his half sister,
Hmm.
Morgause. In
Hmm.
some legends, it's Morgan. The two go back
Hmm.
and forward. Um, Learning of the child Mordred's birth, and like that child we know is fated to be his downfall, he tries to destroy his son. He tries to destroy his son by ordering the death of all babies born on that day.
Oh, that sounds like something somebody in the Bible did.
Yeah. Arthur's
Or
best knight
Herod.
Lancelot,
Yeah.
yeah, Herod does that.
Hmm.
Arthur's best knight Lancelot has an adulterous affair with Guinevere, but like it's never the men. It's always like Morgan who's branded as
Yeah,
this
that's
villain.
that's what I
So
was trying to get to before, is that like the men are not considered bad because the worst thing they do is like go after other people's wives and like, like
kill
adultery and kill
babies.
babies. But I guess that's just like, a day in the life. A king's got a king and a knight's got a knight or something.
I guess so. But like I just yeah, I why does Arthur still get all the glory even now? Like in the 20 whatever where are we at? Like 21st century? Is a
Yeah.
woman considered evil just because she desires power for herself? We still
Yeah.
see this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We
For
still
sure.
see this, right? We still
For
see
sure.
women, if they are
The minute a
the
woman
boss,
starts
if
playing
they are
by the
in
man's
charge,
rules and starts playing the man's
yeah,
game, she's gone against
she's
everything
branded
she's
as a
supposed to be.
bitch.
She's gone against everything she's supposed to be.
Mhm.
She's not thinking in her feminine mind. And it's just like very, very, which may be
Yeah.
true on some level, but like, how you going to condemn a person for that if this is the society like we're up inside? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In a lot of renditions now, Morgan Le Fay is still presented as being a villain because that's just a story that we're told. But I'm kind of like,
Oh, I'm
should she
definitely
be?
over it. Like, I'm definitely not. I'm not gonna ever consider her a villain. And no. The minute you tell me Catholic people wrote something, I'm like, okay, well, I don't believe that.
It's
And
the opposite of that, actually.
yeah, probably. You know what I mean? Like, facts have shown. Facts have shown.
She was this wonderful Celtic healer goddess. And they're like, oh no, she was evil.
Yeah,
Scratch
exactly.
that.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
anyways, it just kind of like, well, I think that's kind of the story essentially does what it's designed to do in that sense, right? Like it keeps it vague,
Hmm.
it keeps it mysterious, and like you said, which I thought was like a brilliant insight, is like maybe they just didn't touch it for a reason. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they just didn't want to fuck
Yeah.
with it too much. And I
You
also
never
read
know.
I read something interesting. I'm trying to pull it out of my brain now. Around the time that, like was it Chrétien? He wrote all of these poems for
Oh,
the
for, yeah, the queen?
no, not for the queen, for her daughter, for
For her
the
daughter, yeah.
Duchess of Champagne.
Yeah.
So, like her mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was like a big fucking deal. She was at one point Queen of France and she was at one point Queen of England, or
Yep.
Britain. She also like waged war against one of her husbands. She was like a super badass.
Mhm.
So this is all happening amongst the backdrop of all of this other stuff, the love stories and the kind of degradation of women. And there she could have been kind of like influential in the way that women get shaped, because here's a woman doing what you said, like breaking the
Yeah.
rules, living her own life,
Yeah.
and
Very
in
much
a
so.
in a what we would consider like literally in medieval, not medieval. No, maybe a bit past that.
Early medieval.
Early medieval time, right? So
I think
that's
so, or like mid medieval.
basically
11
they got a
1100s.
taste. They got a taste of what a woman with money and power could do, and it freaked everybody
Yeah.
out. So they tried to figure out ways to be like, hey, that's not cool. And then we see like her daughter getting these poems written, who just seems like kind of like, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The way that parents do something, the child has a natural inclination to rebel against the way that parents do something. I've been watching the
Well, no,
Gilmore
but
Girls, but
she also, like, her mom also had, stories and stuff written in her court according to her
oh, really?
liking.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was very much like she saw her mom doing that and was just like, "Well, I can have stuff written in my court according to my writing,
But
or,
I
like, according
wanted
to
to
what I
be
wanna hear."
but I wanted to be
Yeah.
smooshy and kissy. Oh, and I also wanted to make a note. Earlier in this series, I had said I think that the French created like romance, like romantic love. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna take that back now because I was doing some deeper reading and around the whole crusades and going with all of the Christian or Catholic soldiers going into Jerusalem. There was like a 200-year period and 9 crusades. So in this
Yeah.
time, a lot of men from Europe went off, and they were told that their lands and their home and everything would be protected and waiting for them when they came back. The thing is many of them didn't come back. They either died there or they actually settled down there. And so
Mhm.
apparently coming from the East and coming from the Islamic tradition, which we haven't explored yet, which is really, really cool, especially when you get into Sufism and stuff. But there was poetry, there was talk about romantic love, and people think that it's those kinds of poems and that romantic idea was kind of brought back by the European guys that did come back from the Crusades, and that's maybe where some of that
I
romantic
believe that.
influence comes from. Yes, it was a very European notion of me to think that the French created love, but it's just like we haven't really delved into like that kind of part of the world because like we said, it's not really our ancestry, and like we kind of want to
No,
do
but
it
they
right
are
and do
the
it respectfully.
that part of the world brought enlightenment to Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So after I read that, I was like, oh, I should probably go on record retracting what I said earlier. Like it was like I had said it was a speculation, but now I could see like maybe it actually was coming from like somewhere completely different. Which, oh, man, I would just love to do some exploration into Islam and Sufism because I just think it's the coolest. So cool.
Yeah, I agree.
I
We'll
love
get
it.
there. We'll get
We'll
there.
get there. Yeah.
But I think that that is it for today. That's kind of the exploration of Morgana
So
and
I feel
or
in a
Morgan
lot
Le
of
Fay.
ways, Morgan Le Fay and Avalon still have a lot to be, there's still a lot to be said, a lot to be written about. If anybody knows of, like, I'm going to call it fan fiction, that's probably not doing it justice. If anybody knows of any other interesting stories around these characters to explore, definitely let us know. I think it would be worth it. And if anybody's working on a project like that, let us know because I would love to explore that a bit more. I think to this day and age, we still haven't done her justice by sounds of it.
Nope.
Yeah.
I think that's fair. I'm just nope. Nope, we haven't.
Yeah.
And with that,
And with that, to be continued
we're gonna
at some
go.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna go for now. And remember to follow on Instagram, Allegory Story Podcast. Send us an email, allegorystorypodcast@gmail.com. And subscribe and follow. And we'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon.